assuming he's going to have some input on some of these issues as well. So we don't know what it's going to look like, but we know there's some commonalities. So I'm going to talk about some of the commonalities, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. We already talked about the $1 million going down to $500,000. And by the way, that's retroactive. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, as we hear so far, and again, everything can change. Nothing's cast in cement. So when I say it's retroactive, it's proposed to be retroactive to November 2nd. Okay, so anything you have in escrow today, right, falls under the new tax reform, although it's not even in cement yet. All right, so again, they could change and make it 2018. I don't think they're going to. They may move it back to January of 2017. I don't think they're going to do that either, but I do know that they're talking about the November 2nd date, which is when the House first initiated the process. Bottom line is it's going to be probably retroactive. You've heard they're going to cap property taxes at $10,000, right? So that's the House version. The Senate version has 0, so there's no benefit to deducting property taxes, state or local, at all anymore. The end result will probably be a compromise. I'm not saying it will be 10,000, but it's highly likely it'll be something other than 0. At least I keep my fingers crossed we get some benefit for writing off our high cost taxes. They're going to, no deduction for moving expenses, no deduction for second home interest. The bill repeals the $4,050 personal exemption for each person. It does increase the child credit from $1,000 to $1,600 for kids under 16. Mom and dad credit will get $300 each. And I'm going through this fast. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say this. All of my notes will be made available to you. So you don't have to worry about taking notes on all of my talks. So I have printed versions of these in Word documents. Neil will post them, or whatever Neil does with them once he gets them. And you don't have to worry about the data. You can read it yourself. Capital gains exemption will change from once every 2 years to once every 5 years. Okay, so you have to live in a property 5 out of 8 years now to be able to rent it for capital gains. 1031 exchanges are safe, supposedly, left unchanged, with exception to anything outside of real estate. So real estate is the only carved out version that's saved, supposedly. Corporate tax rate will drop from 35% to 20%. It is proposed that a 24% tax rate, there is a proposal of 25% tax rate for Chapter S corporations instead of the current 39.5%. But it is not clear if that applies to real estate practitioners. Right? So if you're a Chapter S, you may not have that benefit. Let's see, millions of middle-class Californians will receive tax hike with this program. And if you haven't done the math yet, I encourage you to do the math. Use your own situation. Here's a situation I've been telling everybody, and it's, you know, I'm embarrassing my daughter to a certain degree, but her and her husband, she's married to an engineer. They live in a house in Blossom Valley with a mortgage of $800,000. They have 4 kids between the 2 of them. 2 kids currently in college, 2 about to go to college. So you can already understand where I'm going with this. Okay, so they're paying a mortgage on an $800,000 house. So the $800,000 mortgage. They're paying their property taxes. They're paying all the things that go along with living. They have 2 10-year-old cars that they're keeping together because they have to kind of keep them going because they can't afford to buy new cars. So what does this do for them? This increases their personal taxes $9,000 a year. That's $800 a month. They don't have $800 a month. They're already living hand to mouth like most of your clients, like most of you probably are, like most of your kids are, most of the young families trying to get established in Silicon Valley. We just have an expensive community. This is devastating to them, right? And they're just middle class. They're not middle class for Kansas, being very honest. They aren't middle class for most of the United States, quite frankly. They're middle class for Santa Clara County, right? And this is the problem. This is why it's so devastating to high-cost areas like Santa Clara County or the Bay Area, quite frankly. Let's see other details. The current homeownership rate is currently about 50%. They're projecting if this passes, and it's going to pass, so that rate will continue to decline, right? Because we're going to lose the tax incentive that goes around buying a home. Right? So again, is this going to impact Kansas? Probably not. You know, in fact, I had a fairly high-level discussion. As treasurer for CER, I get to sit in with all the other executives of the other states. The 2 states we meet with regularly is Texas and Florida. So between California, Texas, and Florida, we have like 2/3 of the realtors in the nation. So we had a very high-level meeting back in Chicago, and we said we've got to draw a line in the sand. We cannot let tax reform pass. And I looked around the room at my fellow people from Florida and Texas, they're kind of going, you know, well, we don't see it as the same problem you see it as. Why? Because the cost of housing is so much cheaper there. They're looking forward to the $24,000 standard deduction that goes along with this tax reform proposal. And quite frankly, it's just not, it's a battle that California is going to try and fight by itself, or maybe with New York, because New York's also a high-cost state. But this is the problem. There's the majority of the nation doesn't really resonate with this being the problem. What's their problem? Flood insurance. Right? Well, I'll get into that in a second. Okay, so let's see. The average wealth of renters since 2010 has dropped from $5,900 to $5,100. At the same time, homeownership wealth has increased from $192,800 to $231,400. So we know what happens when you own a house. We know what happens when you rent. You know, they're just different trains going different directions, right? So encouraging homeownership is what we do. That's why I'm saying this is such a sad end result for all the homeowners that are looking down the road about establishing wealth, because being a tenant just doesn't happen. It just doesn't work. Okay, so what does this mean in the long run? Well, today, federal tax funds, 83% of the federal tax funds are paid by homeowners. So we're the ones funding all these, you know, national programs, et cetera. So if we drop the incentive for mortgage deductibility, and we now have less people, in theory, owning homes, I don't know, does that mean that we get less tax revenues in the long run? I don't know that answer. That's a very complex equation. But the truth is that we have a situation where today 30% of the people file long form, right? Schedule A's long form of the taxes to write off their mortgage interest deductibility, write off their property taxes, write off their charitable contributions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're saying with this new version of the tax reform, it's going to drop to anywhere between 5 and 10% of the people filing long form. So let's assume the worst case scenario, 5%. 5% of Americans, probably virtually all of them living in California, will bother to file their long form on their tax reforms. So imagine 5 years from now. Quite frankly, imagine less than 5 years, 4 years from now. Next presidential election comes along, or next high Congress election comes along, and the advertisement is, let's get rid of mortgage interest deductibility completely because only 5% of Americans use it. Why are we supporting something for the ultra rich? Because that's what you will be. You will be amongst the 5% of Americans that bother or have enough interest write-off to claim above the standard $24,000 deduction. So you're considered the ultra rich. And then all of a sudden, it's all gone. Right? And this is a fairly logical conclusion to this particular process. Again, does it mean the end of selling real estate? No, of course it doesn't. We just have to sell under different programs now. We have to know how to explain it. All right, let me go on. Let's switch subjects real quick. I can talk about that one forever. Let's talk about National Flood Insurance Program. I touched on just briefly real quick. Federal National Flood Insurance Programs needs to be renewed. Some statistics on that. $16 billion in losses to the tax program, the flood insurance program, excuse me, with Harvey and Irma alone. $30 billion already borrowed from the taxpayers, that's us, and $10 billion more is needed. So the National Flood Insurance Program is funded by taxpayers. No insurance company within their right mind will issue insurance policies to flood, in floodplains or for housing. So the federal government steps in, creates a program. That program is so far in the red, you can't even talk about it. About to be $40 billion in the red. So Congress doesn't want to extend it. But guess what? We need flood insurance. There's more flood insurance policies issued in California than anywhere else in the nation. Imagine that, right? Well, we don't have floods like, I don't think we have floods like Florida and Texas do. 5 million policies are in 5 counties of the United States only, all located in Texas and in Florida. So what's their big issue, I said? Flood insurance. Their worry, their red line in the sand is we need to extend flood insurance, right? So that's what, and they're really anxious about. So that's the type of nation we are now.